26. Well, with us on the line is Dr. Katherine Pannel, a doctor and the medical director of the Right Track Medical Group. Good morning, Doc.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Hey, thank you for taking the time to be with us. As I appreciate it, the Surgeon General has said maybe we need warning labels on social media. Is that right?
That's right. I mean, I really actually like this Surgeon General's advisory. I think it's very fair. I think sometimes in America, we wait until things get out of hand to try to then fix it, put the toothpaste back in the tube per se. But this is an advisory that basically says, yes, we do have to have more studies into social media use with teens. But there's enough right now to know that there are some dangers, and let's get ahead of it and really put things in place to protect our children.
Tell us a little bit about sort of the dangers of social media use with young people.
So, about 95% of our young teens and adolescents have a social media platform. And about one third of those kids say that they use that platform excessively. So it's really the amount of time. I mean, kids are spending almost 4 hours per day on social media. And what we're seeing is if you spend over 3 hours per day, the risk of depression, anxiety is doubling. So we do see that there are indicators to show that, excessive consumption of social media is causing a rise in anxiety and depression in our youth.
And is that neurological? Is that because of whatever dopamine they're getting from playing on it, or is it maybe it's a combination of both, or is it seeing, when I was in high school, if you didn't get invited to a party, you might have heard about it, but you didn't know it. Now you can sit there and see the people on Instagram or whatever the popular one is now with young people. Is it neurological, or is it social, or is it a little bit of all of the above?
You nailed it. It is multifactorial. It's a combination of all of that. Our brains don't fully develop until around the age of 24. So before that time, brains are very vulnerable. And so we're showing that excessive social media use actually hits receptors in the brain like addiction does, like you said, dopamine. So we're seeing that. So they can be addicted to social media, but also you're right. It's just that seeing your friends get invited into things, or, seeing fitness pages. We see an increase body dysmorphism in our adolescent girls because of social media. So like you said, it's a combination of both. It's both biological and just the social part of it as well.
Well, it really is, to me, terrifying, because it's such a norm now that, I mean, when I'm 43, I got my first. I think I had at my first year of college, I didn't have a cell phone because it didn't seem necessary at 19. And now, you've got 10. I mean, I've seen kids as young as 8 who've been given a full-on iPhone.
You're right. Like I said, 95% of children have some sort of social media platform, and that is scary. And I hate to be all gloom and doom. There are some positive social media, and that was even pointed out in the advisory as well. Some kids that don't feel like they have a social connection, they find that social connection on social media, or it's a place for some kids to be creative. If you like to cook or do crafts, like you can find pages that are dedicated to that hobby. So it's not all negative. I just like to say that you really have to be aware and look at is consumption and the content. And that's where we start going down the negative path of social media.
What are some best practices, some advice for parents? Because ultimately, I assume the only way I mean, this is going to have to be a parent-led effort to deal with social media and have it used in a healthy way. I mean, are there best practices that you'd counsel parents on how to do this?
Yeah, and again, you nailed it. The government has asked social media platforms to kind of step in, but that's being slow to happen. So yeah, right now the onus is on the parents. And that's part of the study was like, we just have to have more studies. There's no set time when you should give your kid a phone. I know there's a campaign that says wait until 8. So maybe wait until 8 to get a phone, 8th grade for social media. But ultimately, you're the parent. You know your child better than anybody, and you have to look at their maturity, their impulsivity, and see why do they need a phone before you decide, hey, this is the time for my kid to have a phone, or this is the time when I'm going to allow them to have social media. But it's also on the parents to model good social media behavior. I mean, if the parents are on their phone and scrolling through social media all day, kids are going to think that that's acceptable behavior. So parents have to watch how much time they spend on social media as well and model that good behavior. And I think the most important factor is parents also, once they do decide to give their children phones and social media, that they really educate their children about the not only the positive parts of social media, but the negative parts too, because it can follow that child for the rest of their life if they choose to post something impulsively.
Oh, I can't. Cannot imagine, because the things that you would think are cool and funny when you're 13 are not going to help when your future employer or potential employer Googles your name to try to do just a little background on you.
Absolutely. I say it all the time. I'm so thankful that I'm old enough that I did not have social media in a way to
Right.
record my behavior when I was younger. That is a blessing. But these kids, I mean, we have to be aware. We have to protect our children because, like you said, I mean, you can literally Google a child's name when they're in there for the interview and see that they made a stupid post when they were 14, and that could cause them to lose a job.
Right. And you really can't erase the internet. I mean, once it's out there, it's
No,
pretty tough to get that genie back in the bottle.
that's right. That's right.
Yeah, I read something. It talked a little bit about. It was an article by a middle school teacher who was talking about the differences he'd seen as more and more middle schoolers were on social media. That used to be, if you had a bad day at school, and you're going to have bad days at school, especially when you're in middle school. You got to go home to to your house could be your safe place, your happy place, and you were disconnected from the school. But because kids were posting so much on social media, they weren't able to escape. They were still seeing the posts that upset them. They were still seeing the bullying. And I've talked to a lot of parents who said the same thing, that it was social media that allowed their kids to kind of be bullied or cause the sort of anxiety and depression you're talking about.
Yeah, you're exactly right. That's where parents have got to educate their children about exploitation and cyberbullying, and that's also a part of the parent child too, to create tech-free zones. Like you're going to have to make your children, you're going to have to set those time limits on how long they can be on their phones, whether it's on social media or not. There has to be firm limits on how long they're spending on these electronics. And like I said, the tech-free zones, the dinner table, you should never have your phone at the dinner table. That should be a tech-free zone. But also, it's kind of up to parents to foster especially for children that can't drive, foster those social interactions that are in person. Take your children, it's the summer, go to the pool and invite a friend, go play at the pool, and don't take your phones. Like really is up to the parents to make sure that they're not spending that excessive time on these electronics.
Yeah, it's my wife and I talk about it a bunch because our kids are younger, but we're kind of fanatical on this topic. I mean, we're very much in the wait to 8 camp. We'd love to see the Jonathan Haidt book that came out this summer, and I think has increased a lot of awareness about all of this. But at the same time, I find myself so frequently carrying a phone around, not necessarily fiddling on social media, but my kids don't know if dad's reading a work email or sending a work email or just filling around on there. And so we've had to be really conscious, just like you said, of not having it at the dinner table, of trying to put it away, put it down, be present for them. And that's, I think it's a challenge every day. I mean, for everybody, because all of us are so connected to it.
We're all so connected. You're right. I mean, I'm not above it either. I really have to watch myself. I mean, it is really hard because we are so connected, especially post-COVID times where a lot of us are working remotely. You may be having to answer work emails on your phone, and I
Right.
know there are a few days a week that I work remotely, and I when my kids come in, they're trying to talk to me. I do want to let them know, like, hey, I'm not playing my phone. I'm actually doing work right now. Let me finish this, and I'll get to you. But again, just modeling that good behavior. And when you're on the phone, and mom and dad shouldn't be on the phone if it is work, just letting your kids know, be communicative, and letting them know that you are answering work and that you'll get to them.
That's good. That's good advice. Are there other? Is there something parents ought to be looking for if their kids have social media to see if it's going off the rails?
Like I said, your children better than anybody. If you start seeing personality changes, if you see them more isolative, more what we like to say moody, that they're getting upset, they're more irritable, just a personality change, it's probably time to go in and look in their phones. And that's part of it too. You should have frequent checks on your child's phone. You have to be involved. You have to be aware and always checking those phones. Also, there's things like Bark that you can set up on your children's phone that will alert you if there's any kind of suspicious activity on the phones. And then eventually, hopefully, these social media platforms, we are starting to see them move a little bit in this direction, but they're going to put more safeguards in place to have parents more involved in the security settings to protect.
Good morning, everybody. This is Lucian Smith in for Paul Gallo here on the Gallo Radio Show on SuperTalk, Mississippi. With us on the line is Dr. Katherine Pannel of the Right Track Medical Group, talking a little bit about social media and children. If you've got questions or comments for the doctor, hit us up on the C Spire text line at 601-879-4395. My sense, Doc, is that there's sort of an increasing awareness with younger parents about this, but that kind of middle school, high school age, a lot of them, the genie for them is out of the bottle. I mean, the during COVID, that helped them stay connected with their friends and not be so isolated. Mm-hmm. But as a result, it seems like there's a pretty significant utilization rate of social media with middle and high school kids.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Just like I was saying, the toothpaste is already out of the tube with them. And that is, again, just where you have to be involved in knowing what goes on in your children's phone. Like I have a 14-year-old, and I'm frequently checking her phone. And she knows that if she changes her password, she loses her phone. I know her password. I go in and I look for things. I mean, one of the things I say is to create your own Instagram account, friend your child, and follow them to see their activity. And I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm sure most children hate it, but you
oh yeah,
kids hate all sorts of things that they need to be doing or that their parents need to be doing.
That's right. And what's so scary too is on Instagram, like even kids have wised up to that. Like if your parent has an account, they have things they call it a Finsta account, which is your fake Insta account, and then you have a Rinsta, which is your real Instagram account. So now parents are having to look for these kids' fake accounts, but that's important. That's why it's important to have your child's password and not allow them to change it so that you can have access to their phone at any point, and know that's a deal breaker. If you change your password, if you don't let me look at your phone and look at your text and see what's going on your phone, then you lose your phone.
That makes sense.
And there's nothing worse to a kid than losing their phone.
Oh, I'm sure. That's really interesting, but you make a good point about parental involvement. Are there resources you'd recommend as parents sort of grapple with what's the right time for a phone, what's the right time for social media for parents to get more information and help make an informed decision?
So that is just another topic that we're all still trying to figure out. There is no set in stone, like you said, about the wait until 8. But again, it is just really, it's a personal decision of the parents and knowing their child. If your child is someone, I know my 8-year-old and my 10-year-old, that they're very active after school. They have after school activities. That actually may be a time to give them a phone, because if they're at an after school activity, especially if it's outdoors, and say the weather gets bad and they need to get a ride home, you want them to have access to somebody, their sitter or their parent, to come pick them up. So, I mean, you have to know, is my child mature enough to go on Instagram or YouTube and not post something impulsively or do a live video? You could tell them no live videos. You just have to know the maturity level of your child and why they are needing the phone. And if they're justified reasons for needing the phone, give them the phone. Or if you feel like they are mature enough to handle it, then of course let them have it. But you still have to be so involved in watching everything.
Which I guess is true of both social media and non-social media. You got to be involved.
Life in general. Yes, parents have got to be involved and know what their kids are doing. We've almost become a society where parents have become friends with our children. That's not our role. Be friendly, but you're their parents, and you have to be involved, even if it's painful to take away their phone, or you don't think that they are ready for the phone and you don't give it to them. I mean, you are the way to protect your children. I mean, that is your role. And children, like I said, their brains are still developing. They don't know how to protect themselves at this point. It's up to you.
Yeah, and that's our job. That's exactly right.
That's correct.
Are there, and I know it varies from child to child, and this is still very new, but are there guidelines in terms of the amount of time that would be safe for a child to be playing on a phone, social media, or otherwise?
Yeah, well, they're saying about 30 minutes to an hour a day, which, gosh, I mean, if kids are spending almost 4 hours a day, that is a huge cut. But that's what they're showing. They're showing that kids that are coming in with anxiety and depression, before they even do therapy or if even medications, if they just basically have their child limit their phone activity to less than 30 minutes or they deactivate their accounts for about 3 weeks, they're seeing tremendous improvements in mental health. So there
That's
is
incredible.
justification to consumption for sure.
Are you seeing an increase in people experiencing, or in young people experiencing those sort of mental health issues as a result of phone usage?
Well, so and that's where it comes in. Is it the chicken or the egg argument? For the past decade, we've definitely seen an increase in child and adolescent depression and anxiety. A lot of that had to do with COVID. And then it's, you have to look at the timing. Around the time smartphones got implemented, we started seeing that spike in mental health issues. But it's sort of, and this is why we have to have more studies. It's were children getting more depressed and anxious, and so they look to social media for a healthy outlet, or is it vice versa? They started having an increase in depression and anxiety because they're using social media more, and that is, right there is why we have to have more studies. We don't know what is causing the other.
I'm sure you've read it, but this The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt
Oh, it's so
talks about
good.
this. Every parent ought to read it, but that was one of the things I was
Highly
fascinated
recommend
by.
it.
This
Hmm.
idea that we're not letting kids, we're restricting kids in the real world. We're not letting them take their bike around the neighborhood like we did when we were kids, but we're giving them just free reign on the internet, and that may be part of what's driving so much of this.
Yeah, exactly. I'm with you. I recommend that book to every single parent. It's incredible, and it does lead you down the path to really do think that smartphones, they are what it was the impetus for the increase in or for the mental health crisis in teens and adolescents that we're seeing right now.
Well, it makes a lot of sense, and I would assume that there's also
Mhm.
a fair amount of bad, predators out there who probably are using social media to get in contact with children. Which, one, to your point, one
Oh,
more
no
reason
doubt.
parents need to be intimately familiar with what their kids are doing on the internet.
Yeah, it's important to talk to our kids about extortion. There's so many fake accounts that will lure your children, have them do things that they wouldn't normally do, and then threaten to expose them if they don't give them money. Or, I mean, we saw a recent death in the Starkville area of a teen boy who that exact same thing happened. He sent pictures that he probably normally wouldn't have otherwise. But it was an impulsive teenage move that ended up killing himself because he was so fearful that those pictures would be exposed. So talking to your kids about cyberbullying and exploitation is huge.
One of the things I think parents have to deal with, and this, is because the early phone giving has gotten so normalized. I assume, and we've not quite reached this with our kids, but I assume there's an awful lot of pressure to give your kid a phone and access to it just because so many of their friends have it. And it seems to me, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, you're kind of threading a needle, right, between keeping them safe from something that's probably not good for them, but also not causing them to be socially ostracized because they're not on the text chain with all their friends.
That's right. And it's very hard. Like I said, I'm not immune to it. I get the pressure all the time. But I mean, there are types of phones that can be just basic phones that do allow that texting because I mean, that's a lot of times like how they communicate. Like if you're on a cheerleader team or a soccer team about practice, about what uniform are we wearing, what time's our game. So you can allow your kid to have the basics of a phone without social media. I know on all of my two girls' phones, I have an app on, or I have put settings in the phone that anytime that they try to get an app, whether it be Snap, Instagram, Facebook, it comes to me and I have to approve that app. And if I
Oh,
don't feel like
smart.
they're ready for it, they're not getting it. So there are ways, and they have these little watches that you can give kids that can directly communicate with their parents, or a small few that are like their friend group, to be able to communicate in those times where you might need a ride or something like that, but don't allow them to get on social media. So there are ways that you could give a younger kid a phone without exposing them to the world of social media.
That's a great point. Those are some good devices. It almost it reminds me, and I'm not suggesting that they are as dangerous, but it's early days. It reminds me a little bit of secondhand smoke. I mean, I remember as a kid, it was nothing to ride around in a car with somebody smoking a cigarette with the windows rolled up. Now, if somebody did that with your kid, you'd never let them get around them again.
That's right. And I think that's what was so good about this Surgeon General advisory is I think it really is trying to get ahead of things because we don't want to look up 5 years down the road and see that social media was actually very harmful and we didn't do enough to protect our children. So this is basically saying while we're collecting the data, while we're figuring out what causes what, let's go ahead and be preventative. Let's have healthy lifestyle measures and put it and start implementing them now to protect our children.
Well, Dr. Pannel, thank you for taking the time to be with us and talk about this. We've had Katherine
I enjoyed
Pannel
it.
from
Thank
the
you.
Right Track Medical Group on with us. Y'all, this is Lucian Smith in for Paul Gallo here on the Gallo Radio Show on SuperTalk Mississippi. Stick with us.